Hello, this is Melissa, and today is the 28th of April, 2024, and I hope that you have all had a good week. I chose to put up for this week's Redux a talk that Alan did on Republic Broadcast Network, RBN Radio, on November the 5th, 2007. Remember, the 5th of November. And he entitled this talk, Psychopathy of the Dominant Minority and Political Ponerology. And as I was going over the news of the week, what we're given to think about, I was looking for something that I thought might kind of tie into that, and this talk came up. One of the early ones that he did on RBN. Ponerology in theology is the study of evil. And there was a book written by a Polish psychiatrist entitled Political Ponerology, a science on the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes. This psychiatrist had worked for the Polish underground resistance during World War II. And he was in one of the last generations under communist rule where he was even able to study in school things like psychopathy and genetics. This would be over for a long time. So he had that in his background. And he wrote about what he described as pathologically egotistical spellbinders. His theory is very interesting about long cycles that you can see, 200-year cycles of basically good times and not so good times, and the moral adjusting that happens in a society as these cycles play out. But anyway, he wrote about spellbinders, pathologically egotistical spellbinders. And he said that these spellbinders hide behind ideological masks. Those are belief systems that the spellbinder uses to gain power, and he said that any belief system could be used as an ideological mask, including religion. It's an interesting talk that Alan did, and he had a couple of callers, and I always find his interaction with callers to be enjoyable. So, this aid package that just passed in the U.S., $95 billion in aid. $65 billion of it going to Ukraine, $26 billion going to Israel. And I just wanted to find out a little bit more because there's stacks and stacks of articles about the package, but nobody actually linked to the bills, and so I kind of had to put it together, and I'm going to give you the broad strokes of what I was able to put together. I found something from the Congress, the House, a government site called Appropriations, and this was House Appropriations Republicans. It's just a 2-pager, and I'll link to everything. And it's called Supplemental Security Funding. So it gives you a rundown of the appropriations acts that were included in this package, and then what was earmarked for where in these appropriations. The first is the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 2024. That bill totals $26.38 billion to support Israel in its effort to defend itself against Iran and its proxies, and to reimburse U.S. military operations in response to recent attacks. It breaks down the money there. The second Appropriations Act is the Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 2024. And that is $23.2 billion to replenish defense articles and defense services provided to Ukraine. And $11.3 billion for current U.S. military operations in the region, $13.8 billion for the procurement of advanced weapons systems, defense articles and defense services, and $26 million to continue oversight and accountability of aid and equipment provided to Ukraine. I used that information to actually look up the different bills, and I'll link to those too. So anybody that actually wants to read the full bill, I'll supply a link to it. Now, as I was digging into Ukraine, the money going to Ukraine, I found an article which I will link to. This one's New York Times, and I think it's behind a paywall, but I'll read you just a little bit so you can get an idea there. It said, this is April 24, 2024. The United States last week secretly shipped a new long-range missile system to Ukraine, and Ukrainian forces immediately used the weapons to attack a Russian military airfield in Crimea last Wednesday and Russian troops in the country's southeast overnight on Tuesday, according to a senior U.S. official. The United States previously supplied Ukraine with a version of the Army tactical missile systems known as ATACMS. That's the acronym. Army Tactical Missile Systems. ATACMS. ATACMS. I'm sorry. You can't make this stuff up, but somebody does. Somebody does. So we gave them some ATACMS, and those are armed with wide-spreading cluster munitions that can travel 100 miles. But as good as those ATACMS were, they weren't good enough, because Ukraine, it says, has long coveted the system's longer-range version with a range of about 190 miles. That can reach deeper into occupied Ukraine, including Crimea, a hub of Russian air and ground forces, and supply nodes for Moscow's forces in the country's southeast. Overnight Tuesday, Ukraine used the longer-range missiles to strike Russian troops in the port city of Berdyansk on the Sea of Azov, the senior U.S. official said, speaking on condition of anonymity. All right. I will link to that, and you can read the whole thing. But, I don't know. ATACMS. So as I was just doing a little bit of digging around, I have to tell you that I went to a site that I don't go to that much, but it's a newspaper, online newspaper that Alan actually used a lot. And I think that I would say enjoyed, but he found the schizophrenic nature of this online publication, the UK's Daily Mail, dailymail.co.uk, to be very informative. I find it hard. Perhaps he had more discipline than I, but I find it hard to look at, but I do understand the usefulness of it. I find it hard to look at because as I'm scrolling down and I want to find out what might be an important story there, diplomat Antony Blinken tries to ease bad blood with China by popping into a Beijing record store and buying Taylor Swift. Oh, wait a minute. That's in the main section, and it's rubbish and trivia. But when you look on the right, even though I'm in the political section, guess what? There's what Alan would call the boob babes. Sorry, but there they are. It's... So it's schizophrenic. It's the girls in swimsuits, tiny, tiny swimsuits on the right-hand side with something that purports to be important. Hamas fires mortars at U.S. pier being built by the army off the coast of Gaza. In worrying signs, troops will be targeted. And then off to the right, there's the actress in her bikini. But what I found was a story about a woman named Kristi Noem. Trump VP candidate Kristi Noem reveals she shot and killed her 14-month-old trained assassin dog, Cricket, and gunned down a goat in eye-opening new book. Now, I'll use this picture here from the Daily Mail to illustrate a video, and you'll see for yourself the cover of the book. The book is entitled No Going Back, and there's Kristi Noem in her navy tidy little business suit with American flags behind her, and then to the right she's in camouflage with a rifle, and she's advertising her book No Going Back. Now, if you look closely at Kristi Noem's book, No Going Back, you see that the cover, I think back in the day, they called all that jewelry bling. But there she is with her big, huge diamond ring on the cover of the book. And this is what has come out. I don't think that the book will be published until May, but it has leaked out what was in it. She killed a puppy. She said it was not a good bird dog. It was untrainable. It was 14-month-old puppy, Pooch, that she described as being untrainable and dangerous to anyone she came in contact with, less than worthless as a hunting dog. So I think it escaped at one point during the training and killed some neighbors' chickens. So she said, I had to kill Cricket. At that moment, the governor wrote, by the way, let me add that this VP candidate is the 33rd governor of South Dakota. Now, somebody has to be the 33rd governor of South Dakota, and it was Kristi's turn. And she rose to popularity amongst a certain segment of the population because she refused to enforce mask regulations during COVID. And she is anti-abortion, and so she fits a certain demographic. So she says, at that moment, I realized I had to put her down. So she took the dog to the family's gravel pit and shot her. Here she writes, it was not a pleasant job, but it had to be done. And after it was over, I realized another unpleasant job needed to be done. She decided to kill the family goat as well, because he was, she said, nasty and mean. He remained uncastrated, smelled disgusting, mucky, and rancid, and loved to chase the governor's children and got their clothes dirty. So she dragged him. This is the quote from the book. She dragged the goat to the gravel pit. The goat jumped as she tried to shoot him, leaving him briefly alive. So it took 2 bullets to take out the goat. She actually said she shot the goat, left him alive. She had to go back to her truck and get another shell and then hurry back to the gravel pit to put him down. Her actions were witnessed by a construction crew working nearby. They looked shocked by what they had seen. So just picture this. If this is true what she wrote, she brings a dog, a young pup over there, a bird dog, and shoots it in the head and kills it. And then, amped up on her adrenaline from this, she goes and drags a goat back to the gravel pit and executes it, taking 2 bullets and a few minutes to get it done, as she's witnessed by a shocked construction crew. Her daughter, the bus dropped off the children. At the time, her children were a bit younger, and her daughter, the middle one, because I did a little homework here, was a bit confused. She looked around and said, "Where's Cricket?" So the dog was close enough to the family that the children, wanted to know where the dog was. I hated that dog, she said. The goat was disgusting and smelly. This reminded me of Hillary Clinton at the death of Gaddafi, the murder of Gaddafi. We came, we saw, he died, and she cackled maniacally. Why would Kristi Noem write about this? Wasn't there an editor there to suggest an edit? Got me wondering, why now, why this? Because it is so over the top. This is a woman who describes herself as Christian, pro-life, says all the right things for her Christian voters. Why would she do this? Why would she write about this? And I put out one answer for myself. Perhaps we've reached a point where we're supposed to see those who call themselves as Christian, or call themselves Christian, as being soulless psychopaths. Maybe that's what we're supposed to be seeing right now. But digging into Kristi Noem, she's what you might call a nepotist. So her family seems to benefit from the fact that she is the governor of South Dakota. The eldest daughter wanted to be a real estate appraiser. I think failed her examination the first time around. There was some accusation that Governor Noem used her position to ensure that she passed and got the job, and the daughter ended up just leaving that business altogether and said there was too much scrutiny on her family and her own children. Her second daughter, now I'm going to put up a picture of the second daughter's wedding in Sedona, Arizona, which is kind of a nice resort area. And I was just talking to a cousin of mine just yesterday, and she was telling me about someone that is in the family related by marriage, and I don't know them well enough to get an invitation to an upcoming wedding this autumn, but she was telling me about the plans for it and the money and the whole production that is being created. And my cousin said something that I thought was quite interesting. She said, well, we're in the Instagram age, and so everything about the venue is being chosen for how does it look in the photograph? What is that going to look like in photographs and social media? And I thought that was very interesting. So Kristi Noem's second daughter got married in 2022 in Sedona, Arizona, in what you would have to call an Instagram wedding. And I'll show you a picture or two so that you can see what I mean. She married a young man whose father then got appointed by Kristi Noem to be on the Transportation Commission, keeping it all in the family, right? Governor Noem flew the family to Arizona and charged the costs of the air travel and the hotel rooms, which started at $1,400 a night. That was for the low end there. Charged them to the state of South Dakota and described the wedding as state business. In this talk, a caller asked Alan if he was a born-again Christian. And one thing that I always liked about the way that Alan interacted with callers is that he was not going to allow himself to be pigeonholed or labeled. He said things which might confuse people sometimes because it might sound like he was bashing religion. At the same time, he was promoting an idea that could only be called Christian. Except Alan wouldn't say it could only be called Christian. He didn't like labels. And he even said to this caller, I don't need a book to tell me what is right and what is wrong. I'll just give you another sentence here that he said to the caller. He said, I wouldn't go by any of the terms that they use today, since I've watched every group and I don't see the tops of any born-again association warning the public of anything. And isn't that the truth? So Kristi Noem's youngest son is now, I'm guessing, about 21. And his name is Booker. I dug around until I could find a little bit about him, and what came up was on a website entitled Collision Ministries. And he does not say there on his bio, oh, I'm the governor of South Dakota's son, but he did say that he was raised in a Christian family, that it took his own personal experiences to develop a relationship with Jesus, his own personal relationship. Collision Ministries right now serves 4 cities. They say that they want to be reaching 250 cities over the next few years. And what they say that they are is student-led ministries. So they go into high schools, I think it is mostly the high school age, and teach high school children how to witness their faith. First of all, how to reinforce their own faith or come to that faith, and then go and witness it to others. And one of the things that I have always liked to do when I'm investigating an organization is find their corporate annual report. And I could not find an annual report for Collision Ministries. I searched and searched, and eventually, going to the Government of South Dakota site, I found what purported to be their annual report, but it was just 2 pages. So each year you got 2 pages, which was it's really just the top sheet saying that this organization has filed. There's no money mentioned, there's no income, there's no expenses, nothing like that. So it's just a top sheet. The way that they come across in their very humble social media, not a lot of followers, it's very low-key, very humble, is that they're just student-led. Aw shucks, the founder of it is a gentleman named John Glasser. He's squeaky clean and just loves the Lord and wants to help young people witness this. And one thing that he does claim is that he has made several trips to Ukraine to witness. And I'm thinking, well, why Ukraine? I mean, is this the only place in the world where Christianity needs to be spread? And further, the organization says that it's a domestic nonprofit, grassroots, student-led U.S. cities. So what's the founder doing taking trips to Ukraine? I found on YouTube a video that was made last month of Booker going grocery shopping with another man to buy water and other supplies for a ministry event that they were having. And he's a very enthusiastic young man. And he gave the devil's claw sign twice. Now, what that is, and I just ran a listener-made excerpts on signs and symbols about the devil's claw. And this is the index and pinky finger held up with the middle 2 fingers down. Now, in Texas here, we have UT Austin and the Longhorns. And everybody goes to the ball game, and they hold that sign up, and it's hook 'em horns, hook 'em horns. But it's also the devil's claw. And there's Booker doing it twice here in this little video. Very enthusiastic young man, like I say. I guess that this event that they were buying the water for was going to be really powerful, because Booker said it's going to be sick. So tied into the aid package is the TikTok bill. They're giving TikTok, like 9 months to get rid of their Chinese ownership or get out of the country. It's not good for national security. And something that I was working on last week got me into the world of crypto mining, Bitcoin mining. And I saw that one of the biggest Bitcoin mining plants is in Texas, which I didn't know. So I did a little bit of investigation today, and I found out that China controls at least 60% of the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency mining. Now, this is an interesting thing here, because the government of China has been down on crypto for longer than a decade. And it finally kind of came to a head in 2021. They cracked down for good on crypto, and you can see articles about this in the World Economic Forum. But these are still, so when it says China controls 60% of the Bitcoin, it's being outsourced to other parts of the world. But some companies are still clearly shown to have ties to the government of China. Texas has proudly claimed that it's going to be the home for crypto mining. And they paid companies millions of dollars not to mine or to slow down their mining operation during freezes and high heat where there was a danger of a power outage. So these companies, many of them Chinese owned, go in, like this is Texas, for instance, and run this operation, which is a major user of energy. I mean, the amount of electricity used to mine Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is just staggering. But something that I came across today was talking about how this was written last year, and I guess in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in 2022, they had broken ground on a new Chinese mega Bitcoin mining operation there, and it was going to be right next to a Microsoft data center that supported the Pentagon. So there were huge concerns about national security. So while they are having this big hue and cry over TikTok, what we have are gigantic crypto mining operations popping up all over the U.S. And it isn't just the U.S. It's because Kazakhstan, I think it's Kazakhstan. One of the stands has been targeted by China for operations, and they've got a lot of them there. And there is a country in Africa, I don't have that pulled up, but so what they are doing is they're saying, well, we want to go where electricity is cheaper. I wouldn't think that would be the U.S., but that's one of the excuses that they've made. But there you go. It was so important in all of this money, this billions that's being sent to Ukraine and Israel to get that TikTok bill in there for national security. Now that Biden has signed off on this and the money is going over to Israel, Israel has described its relationship with the U.S. as ironclad. Again, this one, it just kind of grabbed my attention. That was such a calculated way to say it. It said Israel welcomed a U.S. aid package signed by President Biden on Wednesday that will send about $15 billion. Now, overall, it's going to be about $26 billion to Israel, but some of it is earmarked for aid. So about $15 billion in military aid to Israel, increasing American support for its closest Middle East ally, despite strains in their relationship over Israel's prosecution of the war in the Gaza Strip. Our alliance is ironclad, Israel Katz, the country's foreign minister, said in a statement, thanking Mr. Biden for signing the legislation. It was part of a long-stalled $95.3 billion in aid that had faced vehement opposition from some Republicans over its support for Ukraine, which is also part of the legislation, as is Taiwan. The aid for Israel includes more than $5 billion to replenish 3 of the country's defense systems: Iron Dome, which intercepts rockets that fly in high arcs; David's Sling, which shoots down drones, missiles, and rockets; and Iron Beam, which was designed to use laser beams to destroy incoming projectiles. So it goes on and on and on. Some media that is aimed at conservative Christians have described the bill as funding Hamas because of the aid provisions for Palestine. They say that it funds Hamas, it cripples Israel's ability to finish off Hamas once and for all. Now, right now, the pro-Palestinian protests have ramped up at universities across the country, and Jewish students are saying that they feel unsafe on campuses. One that was heavily covered this week were protests that were held at Georgetown University. That's Carol Quigley's stomping ground there. And this week also the Palestinians say that they've discovered another mass grave at the Nasser Medical Complex, where they say that some of the bodies that they've uncovered had their hands tied. The IDF said that the graves were dug prior to their presence in the area. And then one other little story here about this money that was just okayed, this aid package. This one is about Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. And the headline, this is from the Huffington Post, said, "Johnson evolved on Ukraine. Hearing about evangelicals' persecution may have helped." In Shreveport, Louisiana, across the street from House Speaker Mike Johnson's hometown church, an unusual billboard would pop up occasionally. During weeks when Congress was out of session and Johnson was home, it showed a picture of a bombed-out church in the southeastern Ukraine city of Berdyansk next to a caption, "Speaker Johnson, for a time such as this, Esther 4:14. While the debate raged in Washington over whether to approve another round of aid to Ukraine or pair it with an immigration overhaul, the billboard, part of a campaign to remind Johnson of the price his fellow evangelical Christians were paying for American inaction, stood as a mute reminder to Johnson, a Southern Baptist. The inaction lasted for 6 months, only ending after President Joe Biden signed a law Wednesday giving Ukraine $60.8 billion in additional aid that passed Congress only days before. The responsibility of the free world was placed upon the soldiers of America after World War II, Johnson told reporters. We have to be the beacon of light, and we have to show strength. Johnson's words were music to the ears of Ukraine supporters who had worked for months to get the aid package unstuck. That they also contained echoes of the Old Testament story of Esther, a Jew who was picked to be the wife of the Persian king Xerxes at a time when the Jews were in captivity. Esther, according to the story, kept her heritage a secret until Mordecai, the man who took care of the orphaned Esther when she was young, told her of a plan by one of Xerxes' advisors to kill all the Jews. He asked her to intercede with Xerxes on their behalf, even though it could mean her death. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Mordecai said to the reluctant Esther. She eventually talked to Xerxes, who stopped the plan to kill all the Jews and hung the advisor. Someone who is close to Johnson told me he is animated by the story of Esther, said Stephen Moore, the founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, which helps get aid, medical supplies, and food to frontline areas. Johnson was seen as an almost accidental speaker after he came from backbench obscurity in October to replace ousted former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. His tenure has been marked by constant threats of a similar removal by party hardliners over spending, U.S. spying laws, and Ukraine. But Johnson has persevered, and his stock may be rising after the Ukraine vote, which saw the package supported by 311 House members, though only a slight minority in his own party. He has worn his faith on his sleeve, saying when he took the gavel there was an easy way to try to divine his views on specific issues. Go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview, he said, 2 days after he was elected Speaker. Johnson's activism in conservative Christian circles also meant he could be exposed to the stories of what was happening in Ukraine, whose two main religious traditions are Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism. Johnson is a great, great Christian, and we know his wonderful story from his church, from his family, and he's an amazing servant of God. So even though Ukraine is mostly Orthodox Christian or Catholic, somehow they've got quite the evangelical there, so that means that people such as the head of Collision Ministries is going to make several trips over there, and lots of conservative Christian churches have been hearing about support for Ukraine for quite a while now. In level 1 reality, peoples are pitted against peoples. You've got Jews for Jesus and Christian Zionists. It's this group against that group, this group for that group. And I think Alan has always been quite right not to want to be identified with a group or by a name. Everybody gets used. So Alan would ask the question about psychopathy. What is it that we see when we're looking at a psychopath? He would say, several times he did say, that a secular culture might describe what you see. If, for instance, if you look at a politician and you see psychopathic behavior, a secular culture would call it psychopathic behavior. But a religious tradition might say that you are looking at someone who is possessed. And Alan often posed the question, particularly in 2020, he devoted large portions of several talks to the discussion of the nature of evil, psychopathy, possession. What is evil? This story of Kristi Noem killing her dog was so over the top. Like I said, I just ask myself the question, why and why now? But the idea that this Polish psychiatrist, whose name I will not try to pronounce, who wrote the book on political Ponerology, gives us the idea of the spellbinders who come into power, hiding behind their ideological masks, which can be any belief system, including religion. So when someone says, I'm a this or I'm a that, we all better be knowing them by their works. And one of the conversations that Alan has with a caller in this talk is quite interesting because the caller nailed it. We're looking at a corrupt system. It's ancient, as Alan would say, it's ancient, it's corrupt. You can't just single out one or two bad people and say, well, they're the bad apples. The system itself is rotten to the core. I'll just quickly say that for Tragedy and Hope Book Club, I'm going to be doing a couple of recordings with Jared. We're going to put up early in the week a conversation that we have about the first section in the reading assignment for April, which is World War I, 1914 to 1918, and then probably late in the week there will be a second part of that conversation, which will be the Versailles Treaty, return to normalcy. I can't promise more than that because I've had a hectic little time here with a lot going on, and there's going to be a new series starting called Authors or The Authors, but that should be interesting. That's listener supplied, and I'm sure that I'll have another Signs and Symbols excerpt up soon. I'll link to The Devil's Claw again for this talk, but I'll do what I can this week. But the focus for this week is Tragedy and Hope. I hope that you all have a great week as we head into May, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, and here is Alan.
I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on November the 5th, I think it is, 2007. Newcomers, check into cuttingthroughthematrix.com and download as much as you want. It's all free. No ads, and it's full of information on past histories and the present goings on. They're leading us into this new world order, the new world order. Lots of new world orders always going on when you have the big boys and their families and their descendants at the top of it. I'll start off by mentioning, remember now, I don't get paid for what I do. For those who can afford to send something in, keep it going, please do so. And also check out the books I have for sale, ones I wrote myself, and the DVDs and CDs on the histories, and you can all keep me going. I'll be going in tonight on some of the aspects of the personality types that run the world, and probably always have run the world, at least since the invention or the contract of money, which really came into use when cities were first created, because cities don't produce anything to keep themselves alive. It's all types of service-oriented work they do. They don't grow food. They don't raise animals. Everything comes into the big city. And so when the first city was created, it's what Plato referred to as a beehive. In fact, they would use beehives to bring in this utopia, this republic of the world. And in that city, the people themselves would be given a particular culture. They'd think it was normal after one generation, and then go out and conquer the rest of the planet. And so you had city-states in ancient times, all running with something called money. Money was the key to it. And prior to coining money, they used to weigh it out. And long before most of the histories are given to the public, we know that ancient peoples were mining for gold, and mainly silver. Actually, it was much easier to get in those days. And the Phoenicians, the strange people, the Phoenicians, is really a Greek word for the Canaanites. They were the ones who ran the ancient world to do with money. And they'd ran the trade routes and the merchant ships and all of the bartering and the going on and the trading of money for a long, long time, for many centuries. And not only that, they had a brotherhood because they got their tin. You needed tin to mix with copper to make bronze. The weapons at that time were made of bronze. And for the 300 years, they kept it quiet from all the other countries where they got it from. It turned out they were getting it from a place in the south coast of England. A brotherhood in the Navy could not talk to anyone in any port about where they were coming from, where they were going, and where they got their goods. And we're back with more of this after the following messages. Alan Watt back again with Cutting Through the Matrix and going through some of the histories of this old world and how the money took over from barter, basically, and the money boys ended up being the bosses. And with that came a leisure class, and the leisure class wants to maintain itself, and so they hired the brightest amongst them or around them to be advisors, to study the populations, to manage the populations, and they also ensured they had a good religion. They gave them the rules to follow for obedience primarily. And once in a while, these city-states would have wars amongst themselves because the guys at the top were different. They were different from those they ruled over. They were different in that they had certain tendencies, the inability really to bond with people naturally or have empathy. Today we call them psychopaths. And these psychopaths, they got to the top through cunning and guile and even murder. It's no problem. They killed their parents when necessary. That shows you the types that they were, where they could even bond with their own families. They got to the top and they interbred pretty well in all the ancient world, because they always got to the top using the same moneyed system. They interbred and eventually intermarried each other. The kings and queens would marry from different countries, and the princes and princesses, and they'd marry their cousins and so on. And this went right down through the centuries. And if you follow the histories of Europe and all of the internal strifes, mainly between England and France and a few other countries in Europe, you find really it was centuries of kings fighting other kings in other countries who were their cousins. And generally these kings never took part in the battles themselves, or they were at the rear if they did go anywhere near it. but they profited from it, and they also kept the populations down. And they discussed these facts with themselves too, because they found out that when they were at war, the populace were much more obedient, less likely to grumble, and they'd actually cough up more in taxation. You could tax them and even take their pigs and their chickens and their hens from them to feed the armies with less grumbling. And this went on down through the centuries up until the present day. And these characters knew in the 1800s, for instance, they actually knew in the 1700s that the time would come, because they have all these advisors. As I say, they always hire advisors to keep the pulse of the populace and to let them know what's going on so they can keep on top of things. But they always did studies. Today we call them gathering statistical data. But they've always done this, and they knew the time would come when they'd all be fighting for a global system. And they realized, too, that the fastest way to create changes towards something is to direct opposing forces. And if you don't have opposing forces, you create them. You have conflict creation. And out of the conflict, you have resolution, or synthesis, same thing. The public who go through all of these wars and the depressions that are caused and all the rest of it never catch on, because the rulers make sure that their top universities publish the histories. So the winners always write the histories in a very flowery fashion, and they always give you very good reasons for having these wars, but never the real reasons. And it was always an amazement to me to find that Britain, for instance, went into World War II under the guise of speeches to save your culture and your freedoms and your way of life, which really wasn't far removed at that time from the old feudal system. There still was an upper elite that everyone knew ran the country, even though you had this strange thing called voting. It was fairly recent from the World War I. And when Britain emerged from World War II, they were a national socialist country, because the government had taken over all of the functions, all of the main, what we call infrastructure of society. That's your farming, that's your industry, that's your transportation. They'd taken all of this over and created massive bureaucracies to deal with it. So they went into the war to fight, supposedly, National Socialism, which was Nazism, and came out of the war as a National Socialist country, at least on the outside. But in reality, the top clique at the top, Winston Churchill and others, and it's now been disclosed by his personal secretary during World War II, who's now a Sir, I believe. It's called Fringes of Power. The book, you should read it. And it's about the memoirs and the notes he took while he was a secretary with Winston Churchill, and how Churchill told the public to go off and fight to save their way of life, their culture, and so on. And at parties at night, he was telling his own peer group, as he got happily sozzled, which was pretty well every night, that this is the greatest thing that had ever happened to Britain, because they, the elite themselves, would have their age-long dream of a united Europe. Now, a united Europe obviously meant you were going to lose your culture and your way of life, etc. But these characters have no problem of lying to the general populace, whom they really see as dumb, stupid animals. But nothing has happened since then. At that time, this particular clique signed a deal to deindustrialize Britain and other countries of Europe, and eventually to bring in the system we have now. Britain was the first country to approach France, and together they worked on the integration of Europe. All quietly, all through lies and deception. They lied to the public for almost 50 years, and now they've declassified the documentation from the British government admitting all of this, and at the end it said that the public must not be told anything of this or the truth until it's all completed. And the same thing was to happen to the Americas. So these psychopathic groups that all know each other, this Anglo-American establishment, which also goes beyond England and beyond the US, it's worldwide now, have formed a club over the last 50 to almost 100 years, knowing that they get this global system into place. And as always, down through the ages, when the top psychopaths, these interbred people, and they do have a big difference, because they don't have a part of the brain functioning, or even possibly even there, that gives them normal decency and empathy for others. They're unable to feel the pain. They can say that they feel the pain, like some have said recently, but they don't actually feel anything at all. They're born actors. And we're seeing it manifest today with the ones who are in power across the world that all signed the same anti-terrorism deal, which tells you this deal was set up years and years before to go into operation before 9/11 happened, because bureaucratic departments do not work quickly. And yet after 9/11, suddenly almost every major country across the world had signed the same deal. That takes a lot of negotiations and working with bureaucratic positions. And today we're going into it with the psychopaths in full control, with an agenda which is not pleasant whatsoever. These characters who are into economics understand these sciences. And right now we're at a crisis stage because the big boys who've all accepted the same philosophy very easily, because they're all psychopathic, they do understand each other. We're in the middle of a war. It's been going on, and most people are completely oblivious to it because they've been trained and brainwashed from birth not to see it. Now, I think there's a caller on the line. Is there a caller there? Hello? I heard a voice on the line. I guess not. So there's a book people should really try and get their hands on, and it's called Political Ponerology. I don't know if I hear music or not. I guess I do. So the break's coming up. I'll be back with this book after the following messages. Hi, folks. I want to walk back with Cutting Through the Matrix and discussing a book which people should get a hold of. It's probably the first book where scientists, people who've gone into psychology, people who've lived through tyrannies, pondered the problem of psychopathy and noticed that all of those main characters at the top in the present day and down through history have all of the psychopathic traits. So the book is called Political Ponerology. That's Ponerology. And the author is Andrew M. Lobasowski. But this is an excellent book. It's written obviously from someone who's truly searching. Sometimes he goes off too much into the psychological aspect of, and even the physical aspects of possible brain defects, which still is mainly theoretical, but at least all the signs and the symptoms are in this particular book. And the ISBN number is 1-897244-18-5. Excellent book, written initially by a fellow who came out of the Soviet system, who had some persecution in his life there, and whose fellows have been persecuted for trying to get to the bottom of why the leaders in all idealistic systems end up at the top after a very short time as being all comprised of psychopaths, the same MO. And the poneros is the Greek term. That's where they got the name poneros, for evil, and ology for doctrine or science. So Ponerology is the name of the book. And it's probably the first one to really go into this in any depth and tie it a lot together and put it across in such a way that the average person can try and understand how these people are different from ourselves. But he also accepts the fact that I've said for many years, those who are psychopathic cannot but help get to the top in this particular system, since it's a system that was designed by psychopaths for psychopaths in the very first place. Winners and losers, those who claw their way up and guile and con their way up and destroy lives in the process with a conscience, are so-called successful. You'll see lots of it in the business world, and this author goes through a lot of that and how this is their actual system we're living in, and how they always get to a stage where they come to fear the people and they want to depopulate. You've got examples of that down through history, And he goes into it in a little detail anyway. Try and get that book. Now we have Jeff from Vermont on the line. Are you there, Jeff?
Alan?
Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Alan, how you doing?
Not so bad.
I've been listening to your program for a while, and I'm trying to figure out leaders throughout the American history. I'm kind of focusing on that. That were ingenious, and they were you could say on the dark side. I find Thomas Paine as probably one of the better models of pure genius and just for our founding forefathers. I really can't find hardly anything in what he says about Rights of Man, Age of Reason, or any of his books that would indicate that he would be nothing but true. Just the way he talks and the way he puts stuff down, and just look how he died. And what he thought about the French Revolution is.
You remember, too, though, a lot of what we're given, and this is the problem with us, when we're told something and read something really nice by a person, we form an opinion, and we've got to go into it in further depth. Now, Thomas Paine was a professional revolutionary that came over from England.
Yeah, he was.
Over from a society, and this society had already formed. They'd been there for a while. They trained in Geneva, in fact, a lot of them, and then they went to England. And Paine came from Payenne. And Hugh de Payenne was one of the founders of the Knights Templars, one of the knights that founded it. So these characters belong to societies, and he certainly seemed to say all the right things, and it is true that he went over after the American Revolution to help with the French Revolution. He believed in it initially, but when the slaughtering got to excesses, he complained, and he was put in prison himself for complaining. He didn't go along with all the mass beheadings that was just getting out of hand. And eventually they had to send other ambassadors over to help bail him out and get him out of there.
And Franklin.
Yeah, and Franklin. It was actually Jefferson came after Franklin on that. And so what you've got really is professional revolutionaries who often fight for the right things, but where you always lose is you'll find that in every popular movement or righteous movement, and many, in the State Department have given out their books over the years where they admit, for instance, that they misinterpreted Vietnam because it was a civil war. It was not a communistic war, according to the books now. Mm-hmm. We know for a fact, too, the same thing happened in El Salvador. They tried to blame us, the guys in the military and the intelligence agencies they're pretty well psychopathic themselves. And they wanted to call it a communistic war, but it wasn't really. So wherever peasants tried to get a peasant uprising for a civil war, they were called communists. And so they realized that the guys at the top who gravitate towards power after people have championed a popular cause, the ones who get in and hold on to it then are psychopathic in nature. Unfortunately, they take over. Alan walked back with Cutting Through the Matrix, and just trying to show that after popular revolutions, a coterie will get in at the higher end of it and eventually take it over. And gradually they take the real characters who were idealistic and push them off to the side. And suddenly all the goals that they had planned for suddenly change. And the ones who hang on to the old system, the old constitution, whatever was pushed initially, are pushed off and out into the outer circles. Psychopaths always go into popular movements, and sometimes they even lead popular movements. That's another problem, because they sniff the winds, they look to see where the populace is going, and they become champions, and we've got to always beware of that, because they can start the trouble or the riots when they want to, and that's happened down through history as well. So just because a person says the right things doesn't mean their heart or their brain is in the right place. You have to really check them out. Now I think we have Vernon in New Hampshire here. Are you there, Vernon?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, how you doing this evening, Alan?
It's pretty wet up here. There's a storm going on.
Okay, all right, yeah. I just got one comment I would like to make about what you were speaking about.
Yeah.
Since individuality is like the single biggest threat to their system, right? Do these psychopaths, they fear that we becoming individuals again will connect us to our spiritual self? And it's does they really want to stop, they really want to stop us from making that connection?
Yep. Yeah, well, it's strange enough, even the hardened psychologists that try to go into this Ponerology I was talking about,
but
they all go into that same
website,
even they go into that because you can't help it being human, trying to figure out what is it that's so different from you. How are they so different? And you go into all the aspects, including this soullessness. At one time they were called soul eaters because they tend to drain people around them. You don't know why you get drained and tired when you're around them, but you do. That they suck energy from you in a sense.
Yeah.
It's because your brain is racing, trying to keep up with the strange mentality that they have. And some of the things they come out with, your brain begins to race and you feel tired. So you're quite right. And they do have MOs. They have no conscience. And in this book, Ponerology, they do go through the histories of the present bunch in the U.S. It wouldn't matter if the next bunch come in, because all the ones who are waiting in the wings that we've seen, the Hillarys, etc., are from the same crew. They're all of the same type. But we know that George Bush, for instance, loved to blow up frogs with firecrackers when he was, younger and stuff. And this is the sort of things they do generally in their early years. So there's different signs and symptoms of these characters. And they grow up really with no conscience but a huge ego, and they tend to disdain all the lesser people beneath them. Yeah. I'm not worried about George Bush. It's the ones around him. It's the Kissinger type, the lifelong ones, the real technocrats that set up the world system and are answerable to nobody. They don't get elected. These are the guys, the Maurice Strongs, that do all the legwork and the setting up negotiations that sign us all to our doom. These are the characters I worry about.
It's like they have them where they want them to be right now. So those few sentient beings who are about to make that connection to their spirit, it's like they're on a race to try and stop this from happening.
I think that's right. They are. There's no doubt about it. They're pushing the oneness of everyone. Everybody's one, but they're talking about a different kind of oneness than people in the New Age even think about. It's a oneness where you're all interlinked through computers, through chips, in fact, through body implants, so that you'll be no more problem in the future. That's what their oneness is all about.
Yeah, it's like the beehive mentality. You talked about it. Like, you could have sometimes, I don't know, you could have like a humming going around you right now, like everybody like a part of that hive, and then you seem to like stand out from the hive, so they have a serious problem with that.
That's right, and now they've even released, I don't know if you've seen it now, the FBI signature portraits of people with facial expressions that could be suspect.
Yeah, I've seen that one too, yeah.
It's amazing. Creases around the eyes, anything can pull you in to be interrogated. And this is the old eugenicists, all back in power. They can't help it. It's like any disease, they always come up with the same symptoms.
Yeah.
The earlobes, the length of the ear, the space between the eyes, all of this stuff is resurfaced. This is what they used in the Nazi era. It shouldn't surprise us. It's the same bunch and descendants of back to Nazis that are in right now. Yeah. Not just in the U.S., but in Britain too.
And it's like the U.S. seems to be like the test population for all that stuff going on too.
Yes, it is. The U.S. as the taxpayer of the U.S. has been they've been funding all of this into existence, and they knew they'd do this at the beginning of the 1900s when Britain handed it over to the U.S. to become the policeman of the world. But the average person who heard that happening in the U.S. never thought they'd actually be treating the peasant of the U.S. as the same as the peasant of China. And that's where it's all going. We've all to be equal peasants here, because psychopaths only can appreciate other psychopaths and their cunning. They have no respect for the peasant of any country.
Yeah, and they seem to they keep wanting more and more and more power. Like they're never satisfied with not having enough power. That's they crave for that stuff, the power over others.
Yeah. And that is a fact. The ego, you see, they live on ego. They are pure ego. The world revolves around them. And this insatiable desire for power, again, is so far from the normal that normal folk can't understand them. That's why they get away with it. We make excuses for them. We'll say they're just very keen. But no, these characters are power hungry. They live on power. It's like a kind of ethereal food that they suck in, and they love to dominate others. Power and dominance is all part of it.
Yeah.
And they always tolerate, at the end, they tolerate no opposition. And I mean, they're ruthless.
Yeah.
They're ruthless.
And they have like that agenda they got. They're going to do like whatever it takes. They don't care. And can I ask you a question, Alan? I don't know if you ever experienced this in your life, but since you've been like studying that system, have you never sat down and come like stare this thing right in the eye and see it right in front of you? Everywhere you look around, you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, that happened to me a couple of times. It's like my body started like feeling like funny and stuff. I see this stuff right in my eye. Everywhere I turn, I walk, it's right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
The psychopaths just say that they not only give you a system that the culture that you live in and think is normal because you've been born and brought up in it is their culture. They've given it to you. And so we take on the traits of the psychopath, and the whole culture is buy, sell, produce, consume, and don't fall on the street. That's all they say. And so we adopt those same principles. We're all terrified of falling on the street. And so we tend to exploit other people. That's called good commerce and a good system. It's not a competitive system. It's a psychopathic system.
It is, and a lot of it's hard. It's like almost hard trying to not live in the system and not emulate them. It's like a force all around you trying to make you become like that. But
yes, when everything goes up, everyone wants to keep a standard of living that they're used to. And when everything goes up and prices go up, then the guy above you passes it all down to you to pay off. You've got to exploit someone beneath you to keep that standard of living. And that's how this whole ball of wax goes. It goes round in circles, round in circles.
Yeah, it's like as we going around in a circle, we're not moving. We just keep going round and round and round. That's how I see it.
Yes.
We're not evolving.
Yes, that's right. So, yeah, we have an abnormal system that's been taught as the only one that could naturally be. That's what Lenin said, too. He says there are 1,000 directions the society could go, but the public must not know it.
Yeah.
and so they must believe that the one that they live in is the only natural one that could possibly have evolved. And there's nothing further from the truth. This is an inhumane psychopathic system.
It's not like a humane system. I could see it all around me. It's like when you grow up, you're born, you think, you're growing up in life. That's how life's supposed to be. Now the system, they switch the system around now, so now we could tell the difference because our age. But it's not. It's all their system. They gave it to us, not ours. And we can't try to save what's not ours.
Yes, you turn on the television where it's Olympic sports. All you cheer is the winner. Cheer the winner and boo the losers and tough luck. And that's what's been encouraged in life. And we have winners and losers, and for every top of the pyramid, there's only a few get there. The rest of them down below are called the base. That's the base people. That's the majority of the population. Yeah. And we call this normalcy.
I call it prey and predators. Like, they're the predators, we their prey.
That's exactly what it is. They are predators. They're prime predators, and they're very proud of it.
Yeah, the top of the food chain, and to us, to them, we just gotta be just we like their food sauce.
Well, we are. We're the only ones who really make or produce anything.
Yeah.
And they live off us. And they also, like any farmer, if there's too many in a herd, or even like the Department of Agriculture or farming here, of agriculture in Canada, they'll kill off excess deer. They'll kill off the excess herd.
Yeah. I think, honestly, deep inside, we each in being individual, could, at least, on a personal level, at least we could deflect this thing a little bit. Although we don't have much time, we like a hair away from this whole thing coming now on us. But I still feel deep inside that we got an opportunity left, though.
Yes, we do. And we've got to connect quickly to
quickly, really quickly. We got to connect, or it'll be all over.
It will be all over. These guys are moving fast now, and it's worldwide. And people in Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, all across the planet are seeing all this stuff coming down.
Yeah.
And it's in the air. We feel it in the air.
Yeah, you can feel it right all inside your body. You could see it you can't see it with your natural eyes, but you can see it when you perceive deeper, you could see it ahead of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
A great scheme is unfolding. We're living through it. And it's with bated breath because there's a hush of expectation. We know there's more going on. We're not being told.
Yeah.
And we're quite correct in that. They won't tell us to the very end.
No. Okay, well, I'm going to let you go, Al. It was nice talking to you.
Thanks for calling.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now. And Joe from Florida, are you there, Joe?
Yeah, hello, Al. How are you? Alan,
right.
excuse me.
Yeah.
But I heard you're on disc that my son has. Another friend had copied from the computer. And I like the depth of your conversations, which I'm involved in deeply as well. Mm-hmm. But I have to let you know that I am a food waster as well. Uh-huh. And I like the the Cretan organization, so forth, and so on and so forth. You talked about the Lodge Nights and so forth and how powerful they are, which you are deeply involved as well. Mm-hmm. And I do appreciate depth again, and be able to hear you as well as I listen to other ones on talk shows in the morning up in Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania, USA, and Florida, USA. Thank you. But anyway, I knew that you knew where I was calling from. But anyhow, I was concerned. Are you born-again Christian?
I wouldn't go by any of the terms that they use today, since I've watched every group, and I don't see the tops of any born-again association warning the public of anything. And you got to understand that the whole born-again phenomenon is fairly recent and primarily in the U.S. Across in Europe, if you ask them if they're born again, they'd give you a stare even 100 years ago. So it was almost like a new phenomenon given for the U.S. for a particular time. And it separates so many people on these little parts of doctrine that they're always arguing about. There's so many hundreds now of Protestant sects that on the surface will claim that they're all the same, but they all became sects because they differed on minute points of details. I don't go into religion because I don't need the rules and the laws are given. I don't think a book is necessary to know what's right and wrong. And
well, excuse me, I hate to interrupt, but if you were more or less what we call, or say, born again, the Holy Spirit wouldn't give you the knowledge and the depth and how to proceed to get this depth of information and facts.
But what I mean is, I don't need a formalized doctrine of man or the acceptance of others either to say what I have to say that comes from the heart and my brain and what I know.
I gather you. But still he has to be there for you to accept it and to ask questions and knowledge and so on and so forth.
I'll say that there's something out there like everyone's always known. There's something.
But you always get the facts from the joshing portion of many subjects of presidents and vice presidents and all the guard that they hand into your ear. Mm-hmm. You can segregate it without a problem. You know the depth of it. You know how to dig into it. You know what questions to ask and put on your computer and so forth. I really do enjoy it, I'll tell you. Not many people can sit back and talk of knowledge of what you have, and when you speak of on the computer and so forth, and which a friend of mine puts them all on discs, then I get them and I listen to them. Very, very good. And I was concerned if what we call born again Christian, and I could say you are a Christian. I don't know other than that.
I always remember in the days of Christ, there was no word for Christian. It came much, much later.
Hey, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I may get back with you some other time again. Hey, Thanks a lot, Alan.
Thanks for calling. Yeah, and I do these talks too. I don't have staff. I don't have people punching up things on the screen for me so I can sound very important and knowledgeable. It's all in the brain or it's nowhere at all. And there's no tricks with mirrors here at all, or tricks with... and a lot of shows do this these days. They have staff who will punch in any conversation, any caller. The topics come up and the host sounds as if there was a genius. But here it's a real thing. It's from the heart. And I only say what I know. And talking about the psychopathic types, just scratching the surface here, about the psychopaths who run the system that we are born into. And they control it at the top. They love pulling it over on people. And this little quote from this book here, talking about the business world itself at the top. concern here is that the costume for the new mass sanity of a psychopath is just as likely to be a three-piece suit as a ski mask and a gun. As Harrington says, we also have the psychopath in respectable circles no longer assumed to be a loser. He quotes William Krasner as saying, they, the psychopath and parapsychopath, do well in the more unscrupulous types of sales work because they take such delight in putting it over on them. Actually, they like hunting. They're predators, getting away with it, and have so little conscience about defrauding their customers. Our society is fast becoming more materialistic, and success at any cost is the credo of many businessmen. The typical psychopath thrives. They thrive in this kind of environment, and they're seen as business heroes. And that's what we have today. It's the same with these characters, these family dynasties that people keep voting in. It's all that's presented to you. And even you'll find their oppositions generally are related to them too, including the wives. They're all interbred. These are the moneyed power elite who now lead you into this new world order, this new system. And they've taken such a long time in the planning. They've taken control over everything that you've taken as normal, your schooling system, education system, national education, which is an international education system. Everyone's getting the same propaganda and culture pumped into them from birth. UNESCO talked about this. I quoted it last week from the man who was the first CEO of UNESCO, and that happened to be Aldous Huxley's brother, top eugenicist, and he talked about the ability to control the minds of billions of people through a common education. Education doesn't mean you're given the truth, you're given a scientific indoctrination, so you'll perceive the world in a specific way. When they went into Iraq, the first group that went in, once the whole area was cleared, was UNESCO, to get the first generation trained, to get the youngsters, train them in a different system, and they will grow up to be the leaders in a democratic, we know what democratic means now, we're all living under it, as we use our passports and ID cards and so on like that. They want the same democratic system worldwide, and they also are giving them inoculations as well through the United Nations. And we know the history of the UN with their inoculation series, Ask Africa. That's the kind of world we're living in. It's a dangerous world run by these psychopaths who literally will justify whatever they do. Whatever they do, a psychopath must justify. Not to please you, but to soothe themselves. They've got to save their own ego at all costs. All costs. If it meant destroying the world to save their ego, they would do it. That's their nature. And they can rationalize anything at all. They also have conversive speech. Conversive speech is doublespeak, where they say one thing, the general population thinks that's a nice word, it sounds good, but it's got an opposing meaning. Orwell said freedom is slavery, war is peace. That's what he was telling us, conversive speech. We're seeing it all there today. So study this book, Ponerology. I don't get money for these books. I just push ones that are good. From Hamish and myself up in here in a rainy nights in Ontario, Canada, it's good nights and may your God or your gods go with you.